So I request our panel members, Dr. Mathu P. Pillai, Ms. Gauri Singh, Admiral Jainath Kolambage, Mr. Nidrup Sangpo, and Mr. Narasimhan Sandanam to kindly take the dais. Energy cooperation is a key to enhancing economic growth for the countries in Bay of Bengal. With increased exploration and extraction underway in the region, possibilities for enhanced energy cooperation amidst emerging geopolitical realities in this part of the world need to be discussed. Blessed with abundance of natural resources in the inland and offshore areas of the bay, uninterrupted flow of energy at affordable prices is important for the region's growing energy demands. Therefore, it is imminent that the littoral countries diversify energy cooperation beyond bilateral trade of electricity and oil, which are the dominant components of energy trade currently in the region. This session will be moderated by Dr. Mathu P. Pillai. He's an advisor to CPPR. Also, he's a project management expert with more than 37 years of experience in broad-based oil and gas, petrochemical, and power industries in operations and project management in India, Nigeria, US, Bahrain, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. He has been associated with leading multinational organizations as a project director and advisor. Dr. Pillai is a fellow of leading international organization and serves on the board of International Coast Engineering Council, ICEC, and Water, Air and Food Awards, WAFA, Denmark. So I hand over the session to Dr. Pillai. So before that, I would like to welcome Sir with a bouquet of flowers. Welcoming Admiral Jainath Kolambage. Mr. Nidrup Sangpo from Bhutan. And Mr. Narasimhan Sandanam. Thank you for joining us today. So I hand over the session to Dr. Pillai.
Morning or is it afternoon? It is still morning. After a very engaging session in the morning and also a good photo session, I think you all had enough caffeine injected into your brains because this is yet another interesting session with an expert panel. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for joining us today. And thank you all, a very rich audience today here in the room as well. I don't want to go into the detailed profiles of the panelists, but I do want to touch very quickly on their individual profiles in two lines. Let me start with Dr. Gauri Singh, who is a career bureaucrat and Deputy Director General of International Renewable Energy Agency based in Abu Dhabi. And then we have Mr. Narasimhan Sandanam, a renowned renewable energy specialist who works in the strategic areas of renewable energy. And we have from Bhutan, Mr. Nidrup Sangpo, a renowned journalist with international fame and currently the Executive Director of Bhutan Media Foundation, sir. And we have Admiral Jainath Kolambage, a naval chief turned diplomat, ex-foreign secretary of Sri Lanka, and currently the nominated ambassador of Sri Lanka to Indonesia, sir. I think honestly, I couldn't ask for more. I just couldn't ask for more. Thank you all so much, and from the bottom of your heart, and CPPR for joining us in this event. And I also had a quick scan on the backgrounds and areas of interest for the delegates. Of course, it's a bit divided audience between this hall and the other hall. And what I could see is a very rich expertise bank assembled here. So what I do look forward to is very engaging interactions at the Q&A session, because that is what is going to complete this whole thing. So please put yourself in a very engaging mode when it comes to the Q&A. Take points from the discussions and deliberations we hold here so that we can have meaningful interactions. And I would also request each and every one of you to connect your questions to the topic being discussed here, because it makes more value addition, because the experts can talk based on their domains, which are connected to the topic we discussed. Now, let me just table the topic for today. See, I'm just going back to yesterday evening. We had almost every speaker in the evening touching about the opportunities in the Bay of Bengal, along with the risks, not risks, the challenges. And with about 20 plus percentage of the global population in the region and 3 plus trillion dollar GDP, this region is moving very, very fast and attracting global attention as well. And now it's an all-encompassed view we discussed, or rather the speakers touched yesterday, not limited to the energy. But to me, energy is one of the key catalysts which can bring all these parties together. Kind of a link between all these parties, and which can have a very visibly fast enhancement in the region, growth in the region, prosperity in the region, cooperation in the region. Energy being a great platform for economic security, political cooperation, and enhanced diplomacy. Why do I say that? If you just map out the very concept of energy, don't go to fossil, renewable, the very concept of energy, and try to link it to these three areas. And you can say these are very heavily interlinked. And what I see is, unless you integrate these things very seamlessly, you just cannot get the best out of it. With the best will in the world, for you to get the best out of it, you need to have a very seamless integration. I'm very sure the panelists also will agree with me. Now, before I get into the discussion, I just wanted to put the whole discussion not necessarily into four compartments, but related to four compartments. Why I think so is it's going to help each and every one of us to connect the discussions closer. Let me put it in four areas. One is conventional fossil fuels. So when you look at conventional fossil fuels, the Bay of Bengal, especially the Krishna Godavari Basin and the Kaveri Basin, holds immense potential for cooperation. ONGC is already working with other countries than India for exploration and production. And if you believe the research outcomes in the region or globally, this region has got kind of 30 billion tons of oil deposits. Not a small number. Not a small number. And if you, I think it's a bit conservative number. It's a bit conservative number. Now, so that's the first area I wanted to connect to. The second is the transboundary grid. Whoever was a part of yesterday's roundtable, we touched this point very, very intimately, because this is one of the core areas we can focus for immediate results. So there are a lot of opportunities for cooperation, but we also need to prioritize and see where we can make the differences very quickly. So BIMSTEC has already laid the foundation for that, and we all know that there is a grid in existence. Your country is a great exporter of power, and India exports power to, I think, Bangladesh and Nepal. Now, what we need is an enhancement. I think there were enough discussions yesterday, even in yesterday's evening panel. There was a good discussion that I think these India and Sri Lanka are just 57 something kilometers, and we still have been talking about the HVDC system connecting these two countries, which has got an immense potential for cooperation. So what was this being stopped for? No one knows. But the thing is, these are the simple areas to make visible impact. Next is nuclear power. This is not an area where the countries have to shy away from. There's great opportunity for this. India has been already supporting Bangladesh for setting up nuclear power plants with the support of Russian technology. And if you look at the untapped thorium in the monazite of the sands of Indian coast, it could be very smartly exploited for other countries too. Like I think we discussed about the blue ocean. I think someone asked a question, What about the countries which are not touched by the sea for the blue ocean? They also can be benefited with us. This is yet another example. You don't have to necessarily have the thorium deposits in your own country. So there are ways of cooperation to exploit for your own benefit, because all countries cannot have unlimited generation capacity of nuclear power. And the last is the renewable energy. And the region has got beautiful coastal region. I think if the research have to be again believed, it has got a potential of about 100 gigawatt tidal power. A lot in size. And if you look at the wind energy, yet another area of cooperation. I think India is the fourth largest producer of wind energy in the world. And now we are either going into or already we have gone into the offshore wind energy as well. And if I understand correctly, India has got interest in putting up now windmills in Sri Lanka as well, that matter, if I understand correctly. Now, this is how I just wanted to put the context for the talk. And please, most of the discussions will be touching one or more of these four areas I touched. And I would now request each of the panelists to have his or her own views about the topic. Please start from your side.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Narasimhan. I represent a company called EAI, Energy Alternatives India. We are a climate tech consulting firm, started as a renewable energy consulting firm. Now it's more fashionable to call ourselves climate tech. That's the transformation we had in the last 15 years. Firstly, it's a privilege to be sitting along with all these folks. And thank you very much, CVPR, for inviting me over here. Well, when I came here, I was wondering why am I here? Because this is about coastal and this is about public. We are not about maritime, we are terrestrial, all our work, and we are 100% private. We don't work with the government. So I was a bit kind of wondering, but I'm really happy I'm here. The first session, it was an eye-opener to me. There is so much that's going to happen, can happen in the oceans, which can be transferred from what's happening terrestrial to there. So I'm going to share a few things that I learned in the last 15 years. And I'm going to drop them in three buckets because, as I said, I work predominantly in climate tech. One is what I call as the carbon sequestration, because climate tech is a big word today. One is carbon sequestration. The second is renewable energy, which Madhu touched upon briefly, and the third is food. All these three have to do with climate mitigation because that's pretty much all I know. On the climate sequestration, so what I'm going to do, folks, is not really give you answers because there isn't much happening right now at the ocean level for climate mitigation. I'm going to throw some thoughts that I have so that people like Gauri can share our opinion, and more importantly, we can have a discussion later. On the carbon sequestration, let me just give you some numbers. The total amount of CO2 that we pump out every year, CO2 equivalent, is about 52 billion tons. That's CO2 equivalent, 35 billion tons of CO2 and the rest, all the other gases put together. If you're looking at sequestration, which IPCC says we should actually sequester between now and 2100, anywhere between 100 to 1000 billion tons of sequestration, which means from the air and put it somewhere for us to reach 1.5 degree above the pre-industrial. Where do we do that? Some numbers. The total terrestrial carbon in the world is somewhere in the range of 5 to 6,000 billion tons. This includes bio, this includes permafrost, this includes all the other things. The total carbon sequestered in the oceans is 38,000 billion tons, which means the oceans currently sequester more than 4 or 5 times all the other CO2 sequestered in the world today. I just want to leave you with this number. This shows the enormous potential of oceans as a sequestering sink. Now, how is this going to be made possible is a different question. Maybe that's for later. The second thing I would like to touch upon is renewable energy. I think it already touched upon briefly. Very little is happening today. in terms of what can be derived from the potential for oceans for renewable energy is huge. But how much is actually derived today is very little. He mentioned already offshore wind, the Bay of Bengal. Yes, there have been moves, but there is no offshore wind. It is not as high as what it is in some other areas. That is the truth. The potential again probably isn't as high as what it is in the North Arctic, and there are a few others. Well, for instance, there is tidal. Yes, the potential is far into the future. But if you just look at the three key things: tidal, wave, and offshore, potential is there, but we haven't really developed it. So that's the. Now, I must be hearing about how plant-based meat is replacing 1 billion tons of CO2 equivalent and only 35 billion tons of CO2. It's fantastic. One could be fish itself, which has a much lower carbon per kilogram of protein than does livestock. Other ocean foods, that's something I'm not very fully aware of. But the third thing, when it comes to ocean food, interestingly, is simply shift from animal meat to some other meat. There is a big percentage. Secondly, from energy, there is significant potential for renewables, especially from offshore wind, wave and tidal. Very little has been exploited in this area. And thirdly, from food, in addition to fish substituting a larger part of meat, other ways by which the food ecosystem here in the form of seaweeds and other things, can there be a carbon mitigation agent? Just thought I'd leave you guys with these thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Santana. Now, Dr. Singh, if you can please throw your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Madhu. And thank you, CPPR, for giving me this opportunity to share my perspectives. I just want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the organization that I'm working in, which is the International Renewable Energy Agency. This is a intergovernmental body which has about 168 countries as members, and our headquarters is in Abu Dhabi. We also have an office in Bonn in Germany, and most of our counterparts in the government are ministers and ministries of energy. So that has given us an opportunity for the last decade and now more than a decade to be interacting with governments across the world to support them in their quest for increasing renewable energy in their energy mix. And now our mandate has become wider, and it's about supporting countries with energy transition. So we do work with regional bodies. We work a lot with, of course, global bodies, but all to be able to support governments in the increased deployment of renewable energy. So we do a lot of analytics. We have very many publications that we come out every year on various aspects of renewable energy, and we also do a world energy transition outlook, which is to say what are the kind of pathways we need to be focusing on if, as a global community, we want to make sure that we stay within the 1.5 degree centigrade kind of a pathway. So what I want to, in just the opening remarks, what I want to talk about is that the narrative in this decade has really shifted. In the last decade, IRENA was really about talking to governments about giving them the socio-economic benefits of renewables, telling them how the cost is coming down, looking at grid flexibility, looking at technologies that are emerging. And we see a very strong political momentum that's getting built around energy transition. And as you all might know, that there are a number of countries now, I think over 130 countries, that have defined when they want to go net zero. So this is this very strong political messaging that is going across to investors, that's going across to other stakeholders. But with the Ukraine crisis this year, this narrative has got an additional element that has been added, which is energy security. Energy security, I mean, I haven't seen that being as a dominant piece and why countries should be looking at renewables more strongly. But now, because of the very strong discussion on energy security, energy independence, renewables are now making they are now very much on top of the agenda of most of the governments. Now, let me also bring in a couple of more facts for the audience to think about, and that is that when we are talking of energy transition, we are of course talking about moving away from fossil fuels, which at least countries in the Bay of Bengal region, they are largely dependent on, and by largely I would say almost 80% or more dependent on fossil fuel, and most of it imported. So making this shift is not going to happen overnight, and as we've seen, even for countries that are much more advanced in terms of being able to manage the infrastructure, Europe has had issues about making the shift from the gas that they were importing. And what is important, of course, is to be also able to realize that the technologies that we need to make the energy transition are all there. So it's not as if we are waiting for some magic bullet in the future to come and then suddenly we say, okay, this is what was needed for making the energy transition. So at IRENA, we definitely think that if I have to mention 5 or 6 important technological pathways that countries can start moving on, then definitely it would be renewables, the low cost of renewables, which is now probably the lowest cost of energy that we can get in most of the geographies. So renewables, energy efficiency. I can't stress energy efficiency enough, because that's not so tangible, but in terms of what impact it can have is huge. Then electrification. We are, as a world, going to move into a much more electrified economy. Right now, if I talk about electricity, it is just about 20+% of being an energy carrier. So this will increase to about 50% in the next 3 decades. Green hydrogen and hydrogen, which you would have now heard a lot of discussion on, sustainable biomass is the other thing. And of course, fossil fuel will remain a part of the puzzle, but with sequestration and CCUS. So let me just leave with these thoughts, and maybe we will come back.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. Can I request Admiral Kolapati?
Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. Permission from the chair and the co-panelists. I will be focusing little more on the topic, but the strategic cooperation point of view, because I'm not really an energy expert. But I like to add one more word to my topic. I like to add energy security and cooperation, not only energy cooperation. To me, these two go hand in glove. That is security and cooperation. Now, energy security and cooperation is in the center stage of many discussions in our countries, and on economics, on development, and to me, national security discussion, energy security and cooperation is of paramount importance. We all know that there is a growing demand for energy because we are all developing countries. And although we heard that the potential is there in the ocean, from the sun, but we are not yet there. And therefore, in the foreseeable future, we will continue to use fossil fuel and the hydrocarbons coming from ocean or the land, and that we will not be immediately moving into renewable energy. In my opinion, maybe at least for a decade or so. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I like to be very optimistic. And many countries, as Madam said, we have declared our intentions to be net carbon zero by some year and 70% of renewable energy by a certain year. But to me, achieving these targets that we ourselves have declared is also challenging. And also we know that the Bay of Bengal is supposed to be very rich in hydrocarbons, and it is not yet emerged as a major region where we exploit seabed resources in hydrocarbons or even seabed minerals. However, we need to therefore depend on the Persian Gulf for energy requirements in the near future. Now, the conflict in Russia-Ukraine has really added to our worries in energy security, and although it is not really the conflict, but the resultant price of oil, which has impacted our economies, and I again call this unintended consequences of targeted sanctions. Now, the sanctions were targeted at a certain country, but the impact of it is felt everywhere, including our region. And we all remember that a barrel of oil from about 80 US dollars shot up to about 130 US dollars. Of course, now it has come down to about 90, 85, 90. But who can afford to pay that escalated price? So therefore, these targeted sanctions, they are a double-edged sword. I mean, it is not only at the intended country, but the peripheral countries are also suffering. Now, another thing that we don't have in the Bay of Bengal is a comprehensive regional maritime strategy. A comprehensive maritime strategy for the Bay of Bengal. And therefore, the topic that the energy cooperation and energy security is paramount important. So with this background, with this backdrop, I have identified 5 areas for energy security and cooperation. Number 1 is transportation of energy by sea, because we are depending on the Persian Gulf, that is the source, and we need to reach the energy to all our countries. So therefore, security of energy transportation by sea is one critical area we have to pay attention in this century. Second one is, we heard quite a lot even this morning, security and sustainable exploitation. Security and sustainable exploitation of energy resources in the Bay of Bengal. It is not only sustainable exploitation, but we need to provide security for various platforms which will be engaged in the ocean exploration. Third one is, especially from Sri Lankan point of view, economic security or economic ability to purchase oil. Now, we all know what happened in Sri Lankan context when we did not have sufficient foreign reserves to purchase oil. It led to toppling a government, right? So this economic ability of individual countries to purchase oil. And then the fourth is, of course, the efforts to make renewable energy. We heard quite a lot about various potentials, but then how are we going to get this going? And the fifth one is energy cooperation. In order to achieve this, we need energy cooperation. And we all know that the Indian Ocean is increasingly becoming a region for strategic competition, strategic convergence, which has given rise to strategic dilemma and strategic ambiguity. Big people fight and the small countries suffer in this game. And therefore, the threats in the Indian Ocean for energy transportation or the free flow of energy stems from state versus state competition. Although there is no immediate threat or the immediate prospect of two countries going to a war in the Bay of Bengal, however, that threat is looming. But more than the state versus state threat in the Indian Ocean, I would like to say the non-traditional security threats coming from piracy, gun running, human smuggling, UU fishing, and environmental degradation as immediate threats that we need cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, we all remember around 2009 how a small group of Somali pirates took the entire world merchant shipping fleet into ransom, and how the energy flow was heavily impacted. We cannot forget that. Can we say for sure that it will not happen again? So that is why I say facing non-traditional security threats in the Indian Ocean for energy transportation is an urgent need that we need to focus. So the non-state actor threat is more prevalent in the Bay of Bengal than the state versus state threat. Now, another thing that I want to mention is, we talked a lot about sustainable exploitation of ocean resources. Right now, most of our capitals are engaged in delimitation of the continental margin. Now, what I hear from many capitals across the Bay of Bengal is, we are still trying to get the maximum for us. Argued, why can't we look at it as a regional common and look at from that point of view? Then the answer that I got is, no. First, we must get the maximum for us. And thereafter, let us address the contentious issues. Because if you know the delimitation process, there are certain areas where our claim, the Sri Lankan claim, collide with the Indian claim, Myanmar claim, and the Bangladeshi claim on one side. On another side, it coincides with the Maldivian claim. Now, our capitals are right now trying to get the maximum for individual countries, even in those supposedly contested areas. So this is one area, ladies and gentlemen. In the morning also we asked, the doctor said, we asked this question, what can we do? Look at these as regional common. The irony of it is, most of the countries do not have capacities and capabilities to exploit anything, even if we get these areas. Possibly other than India. But still, we want to claim this area for us. This is the irony of it. So this is a huge problem that we need to overcome. And we don't have blue technology for exploration. We don't have capacities and capabilities. But still we are trying to maximize our claims. This is one area I recommend this conference to take forward. How do we look at this as regional commons? Then also, ladies and gentlemen, still I mentioned that transportation of energy is a huge problem, and economic security of individual countries. This is what Sri Lanka has experienced. There was a time we could not open a letter of credit to buy oil. And there was a time that the banks refused to open even an LC because they did not have dollars. So when you don't have dollars, you can't buy oil. You can't buy gas. Now when you have queues, long queues, people start agitating because these are basic needs. Now, so in that breath, I must say we are really grateful to India. India provided us $3.8 billion US dollar, mostly credit line, basically to buy oil, gas, and essential medicine and food security. Without that, Sri Lanka would have collapsed completely. Yes, we have defaulted our loans, but without India's assistance, right now we are trying to get the IMF commitment, but it's taking a long time. So renewable energy, huge potential, but again, investment, developing capacity is not there, right? Of course, here again, I must thank India because they gave $100 million US dollars to develop an energy park in Sri Lanka. So the work is progressing. Now, these are the areas that we need to work on when we want energy cooperation and energy security. I would like to end because this is a commitment for the whole world. Now, the world has a responsibility to make good on the promises that they have made to protect the environment, to protect the climate, to prevent global warming, and also to prevent extreme weather events, but they are not keeping the promises that they have made to the letter. Now that is why my president who went to address the COP28 in Egypt, blamed the international community, saying that you have not kept the pledges that you have made. So please do it for the sake of the whole world. Now, we like the environment, we want to protect the environment, but we need capacities and capabilities in order to exploit the ocean resources in the most sustainable way, and thereby ensuring energy security and energy cooperation across the Bay of Bengal. Thank you.
Thank you, Admiral, for that great insights. Now, can I request Mr. Sankpo to share your thoughts, please?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Before I give my view on the conference and the topic of discussion, I'd like to share a few stats from Bhutan. I come from a carbon negative country, and Bhutan conserves 71% of its total land area under forest, at the cost of some of our farmers sometimes losing 71% of their crops to wild animals. Big sacrifice, and Bhutan's constitution requires the government to conserve 60% of total land area under forest forever, for all time to come. So that's a commitment Bhutan has made in terms of environmental conservation. So why do I share all these stats with you? Because it's related to hydropower, it's related to energy, and it has a huge impact on energy production. And yet, despite all the achievement on the environmental front, Bhutan is one of the few countries in the region heavily impacted by the climate change. Our glaciers are melting, our rivers are shrinking, meaning our hydropower production capacity is going down by the year, and so on. And for the backdrop to this discussion, I would like to share a few stats again. The regional stats, not from Bhutan now. The demand for electricity in the region, BIMSTEC region, is likely to outpace supply by 2030, which is not far. The demand is going to outstrip supply. Net import of energy in the BIMSTEC region increased by 2.5 times between 2005 and 2018. And self-sufficiency in energy declined from 80% in 2005 to 72% in 2018. Now, these are interesting figures. And another reality that we often tend to overlook in our discussions on energy is that the energy cooperation is mostly bilateral. Multilateral cooperation is difficult, sometimes even far-fetched. Later I will share how it's difficult and far-fetched in the region. Currently, the energy sector cooperation mostly focuses on the two zones, littoral zone and the Himalayan zone, if I may call it, the northern part, southern part, and in between is India, the most powerful voice in the region, connecting the Bay of Bengal and the Himalayan nations, Nepal and Bhutan. And currently, energy cooperation exists between India and Sri Lanka, India and Bangladesh, India and Myanmar, India and Bhutan, etc. No third country has been able to come into the cooperation without geopolitics coming into picture. For example, there's long-standing, excellent, often described as shining example of hydropower cooperation between India and Bhutan. But the moment Bangladesh wants to come in, geopolitics comes into play. So the current scenario is that is mostly bilateral. How do we make this cooperation multilateral? And how do we bring littoral zone and terrestrial zone together? And India, I think, can play a big role in connecting the two zones. And right now, in the northern side, led by India, it's the cooperation has been mostly among BBIN nations: Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal. All the four countries cannot cooperate, and not even three countries. So this is one of the challenges in energy cooperation. And then one of the questions for discussion is how do we promote cooperation, energy cooperation among littoral countries? And that is the southern zone. So that begs another question, which is how do we promote cooperation among northern zone? India, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Nepal. How do we do that? Then we are breaking up the region into two blocks, the southern and northern. How do we bring these zones together? I think India is in the middle, big, powerful, influential. So how does India play its big brotherly role, as we often describe it, to bring other smaller, less powerful nations together? And what is there for landlocked nations like Nepal and Bhutan to gain from littoral countries, from the wealth of your ocean? And on the other hand, what is there for other countries to gain from the water wealth? We call it the white gold of Nepal and Bhutan. We have a huge hydropower potential. How do we make other countries in the region gain from our wealth? In energy cooperation, how do we transcend geopolitics? The moment two countries come together, there's geopolitics. The moment three countries together, more geopolitics. Four countries together, even more geopolitics. How do we transcend that? How do we transcend also resource nationalism? That each country is excessively proud of what it owns. Nepal and Bhutan very proud of hydropower, and probably wouldn't let it go easily. And other countries have their own resources, and they're very nationalistic about them. So how do we transcend that? So these are a few questions for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sanko. If I just consolidate few interesting points, because there were a lot of very interesting and I would say exciting points made in this, introductions. One point I would like to connect from Dr. Singh and Admiral is the connection of, as you rightly said, sir, energy cooperation and energy security cannot be detached from each other. Totally agree with that. And I love to extend that energy security to energy efficiency, what Madam said. It's a very interesting thing because unless you achieve energy efficiency, which is pretty intangible and people do not understand, because that is technology. Energy security is a bit less than technology, whereas when it comes to energy efficiency, it is technology. So unless you integrate all these three things, you won't get the best out of it. You will still get something. And I also want to touch upon your point between the bilateral and the multilateral. I was a bit, I should use the word shocked to hear yesterday that, India wouldn't let Bhutanese power to be exported to Bangladesh. But when I went through the Google yesterday night, I understand that we import power from you, Bhutan, and we export power to Bangladesh. So it's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. And I just wanted to connect that point, what you made now. Very interesting conversations. And now we have, I don't know how many minutes we have, or close to an hour we have. 10 minutes for question answers for from the audience. Okay, very good. So I would leave the floor open. If you could make the questions pretty precise, and if you have a choice of panelists to answer, please make it clear if possible. And before that, please introduce yourself as well, very briefly.
Sure, thank you. So I'm Rakesh, I'm a writer. My question is addressed to Mr. Sangpo. Mr. Sangpo mentioned that he comes from a carbon negative country, and so despite doing what is necessary in the climate front, they still have to bear the negative effects of climate change. So they preserve water, they preserve the ecology, they preserve whatever is possible, and then they still have to deal with melting glaciers, drying of rivers, and all those problems. So how do you look at it, sir? Despite doing everything in your capacity, you still have to bear the brunt of climate change. So how do you look at it?
Make it a bit more precise so that the answer could also be precise and to the point.
Yeah, in simple terms, you are doing everything that you can do to battle climate change, but you still have to bear the negative effects of climate change. So how do you look at it?
Or maybe what's the point?
Exactly.
So what he is asking is, we are doing everything humanly possible towards climate change and its impact. But what about, should I use the word, the cost of it?
No, despite that, they have to bear the brunt of climate change. So it's not justice being done to them.
I have to look at from the moral justice point of view. Yes, it's unfair, but I think as a small country with an acute sense of vulnerability, I think Bhutan must learn to live in a world that is hostile. There's a climate that's ravaged by climate change, and in a region that has a lot of climate issues. I think there's no room for blame game here. That we are not polluting, you're polluting, therefore we don't want to cooperate with you, and so on. I think Bhutan has learned to live with its neighbors pretty well for, I think, 5 decades now, since we opened up our country for modernization.
But what motivates you? Is it just the moral aspect that motivates you? Because tangibly, you're not getting anything out of it. That's what he's saying.
Tangibly, yes, tangibly. But because other countries are polluting, doesn't justify that we also start polluting.
That's the point.
I think conservation has always been in the Bhutanese ethos. So the drafting team of our constitution kept that in mind, and that is a constitutional mandate. So I think
that's the lesson for all of us. If we
yes.
can do something about it. Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
Hello, sir. Thank you for that wonderful panel. My name is Soumya. I'm a senior research fellow with a think tank based in New Delhi. My question is largely to the panel, since everybody spoke about renewable energy in different capacities. In COP26, we saw Prime Minister speak about the global solar grid and universal solar grid and global grid initiative and one solar, one world, one sun, one world, one grid, can recall it correctly. What is the status of that grid as of yet? Because I think that was one of the only times when we got closer speaking about a universal grid for sharing of energy. And if there is any movement in that regard, if yes or no, and can that be something that can be replicated in the Bay of Bengal region, considering these are all energy deficit countries largely and energy importing countries largely and doing some good initiatives on renewable energy? Can something like that be replicated in the Bay of Bengal? Thank you.
Thank you, Soumya. I think, one of the things that you said in your opening is that for energy cooperation in the region, one of the key enablers is going to be the regional grid. I mean, there's absolutely no question about it. And even if we are going to think about getting more renewable energy into our grid, a larger grid actually acts more like a balancing structure. So we already know that in India, for example, we have the grid, right? It's a one grid for India. And you know that the northeast, the time difference between the northeast and say the western part of India is already almost around 40 minutes of extra sunshine that can feed into the northeast, and the sun rises earlier in the northeast in the morning. So that's where the concept came from, that the sun is always shining at some point, and why not use it as it moves in its journey. So it's really not about a new grid. Let's get that right. We already have regional connections between India and Myanmar, India and Bangladesh, India and Bhutan, and now one of the things that's now being done, the feasibility studies being done about connecting the western part of India to Oman, and then connecting it to the GCC grid, which will then connect into the Mediterranean, because there are also connections going between Saudi and Egypt is already underway, and then it goes into the European mainland. So it's really a concept about getting the interconnections right wherever they are missing. And I just want to add in this, because as we talk about energy transition, we have to be very clear that we are probably not looking at the same kind of interdependencies that the fossil fuel trade has led to. You're looking at a very different kind of a relationship, maybe also in terms of supply of technology. Where do our solar modules come from? Where do the parts of the wind ecosystem come from? So you're looking at a different ecosystem and the relationships that will have to be built. So I think one of the key things, and as we're talking about regional cooperation and the questions that were being asked, I think energy diplomacy as something that needs to be focused on has really not been a focus for diplomacy, at least in the region. It's now very much needed, especially when we're looking at different kind of engagements. And just to the point that if I look at hydrogen, which is an evolving technology, we have assessed that hydrogen trade is going to be regional rather than global. So if you're looking at these kind of emerging opportunities, I think our diplomatic efforts and our understanding of how the new relationships will span out and will come out is going to be very different from what we have imagined right now. And clearly we haven't learned a lot from the game theory, because had we done so, it wouldn't have been a zero or a all game. Thanks.
Yeah. Can I add to that?
Please.
Just one stat for you, Soumya. There is this Australian company called Sun Cable, which is putting together, and this is not dreams anymore, they already started work, a 4,200 kilometer subsea cable connecting Australia to Singapore. And the idea is they're going to put up thousands of megawatts of solar power plants in Australia, and supply almost 15 to 20% of all Singaporean power needs. And the logic is extremely simple. Singapore's population density, I think, is 500-fold that of Australia. Australia has enormous amounts of desert lands, lots and lots of sunshine, very few people, and Singapore, the exact opposite. So that's one stat for you. You can look it up. It's already happening, and hopefully many other things will happen as well. That's Sun Cable from Australia. Thank you.
I'm glad. I don't think many people on the world know how much the technology has advanced and put in practice. We think many things are dreams, many things are no dream. People have successfully practiced it. There could be enhancement opportunities, I do agree with that, but the thing is, it is in practice.
Yeah, it's happening. Yeah.
Sorry.
May I
Oh, sorry. You want to add to that?
add to this transboundary grid interconnection? Not directly in the answer to the lady's question, but the addition to the discussion. I'll give you a perspective from this the northern bloc again: India, Bhutan, Nepal, Bangladesh. There was a discussion in 2016 between Bangladesh, Bhutan, and Indian government, trilateral energy cooperation, which will enable the three countries to share electricity across the borders. MOU was drafted, shared among the three governments. Nothing happened. 2021, the discussion was brought back. The three governments discussed. Nothing happened. Early this year, 2022, when Economic Affairs Minister from Bhutan visited India, he discussed it with the Energy Minister, Mr. Rajkumar. Still nothing happened. 7 years on, after the initial discussion, nothing has happened. So that illustrates how challenging multilateral energy cooperation is in the region. But I want to clarify that India is not to be blamed for this, as you implied in the beginning, that India did not allow Bhutan to transmit electricity to Bangladesh and so on. There are more intricacies involved in this, not as simple as this, I think. And the same challenge applies to Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh bloc.
Is it?
So that we should remember this as we discuss cooperation. There are ground realities that we should remember how the challenges.
Hi, hello, the Policy Institute, and I would like to raise this question to Mr. Zango again, and perhaps Admiral can add to that further. Coming back to the geopolitics that Mr. Zango talked about, he said it's inevitable to, when we talk about cooperation in Bay of Bengal and energy crisis, geopolitics will jump in. And so I would like to bring in here the elephant in the room, China being, whether you say destabilizing factor in the cooperation that you are talking about in Bay of Bengal. How will that reflect in the cooperation, whether you say Nepal or Sri Lanka or Bhutan, right? Because you have different equations with China. How will China-India relation roll out in this cooperation of the Bay of Bengal? Thank you.
Very interesting.
Hour to answer that question. And of course, the elephant in the room is there. So we can't pretend that China is not there. China is there. And I think especially from energy transportation security point of view, more than the exploitation, because exploitation we can say it is kind of a regional thing. But what about the energy transportation? And China is almost a net energy importer, and nearly 70% of their energy goes to the Bay of Bengal. So therefore, China is pretty much part of the energy security equation in the Bay of Bengal. So when we talk about the energy security, we cannot say China out. No, it has to be there. So we need to come out with a maritime strategy for Bay of Bengal. Do we have one? Madam, we don't have one. I mean, we have free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. We have Indo-Pacific strategy. We have ASEAN outlook for Indo-Pacific strategy. But where is Bay of Bengal strategy? So that is where I like to propose the BIMSTEC. So we don't have to invent the wheel. BIMSTEC can be a suitable platform. But if you look at the 7 sectors of BIMSTEC, it deals with technology, security, development, all that is related to what we are talking now. Energy, cooperation and security. So let us come out with our own strategy, but that strategy should not be an inclusive one only for the Bay of Bengal region. It won't work. It has to be not an exclusive one. It has to be an inclusive one for every player. So this is my answer. So we can't pretend that China is not there. It is there. And although we need not talk about it, China is pretty much there.
I think China is very much there in the ocean. China is already there in Bangladesh, already there in Nepal, because the India-Bangladesh Nepal bloc, Bhutan-Bangladesh and Nepal bloc could not come together.
More questions? Yes.
Actually, I have a comment, if you don't mind. I became very emotional when our Bhutanese expert repeatedly said nothing happened. So that means we have to think seriously. I was wondering why nothing is happening. We are talking about cooperation and coordination between countries. I think the problem here is our human nature, resistance for change. That is a major problem here, and also slowness in decision making, and that is also, I think, a problem. Sometimes I think the problem is by decision makers, when they take decisions, they take it very slowly, and sometimes they worry on things that they don't need to worry. For example, regarding energy cooperation, this is all about benefits we get. There's nothing to worry. Let's get it done, isn't it? This is happening regarding many issues between countries, like whether it is ratification of a convention. Countries keep thinking, what will I get if I sign this convention? May I have some limitations, or may I have to give up some of the power I have? These kind of unnecessary worries are there in these matters, I think, while taking decisions.
Should correct it. Can I please? Here. Please.
Good afternoon. My name is Lakmal Fernando. I'm from Sri Lanka. By going through the remarks of Mr. Sangpo, it was very disturbing to understand however much we speak about a world grid or a regional grid or whatever, if it is not facilitated by the governments, particularly the big brothers, I'm referring to India, it's very disturbing. Change should start at home first. Then we can speak to our neighbors about the change. So I think it is time for us to think how we are going to take care of our poor neighbors around India. I come from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is we are heading into energy poverty. Probably, say mid next year, we will feel it, completely different scale of energy poverty. So, and I have been promoting the interlink between Sri Lanka and India for the last 5 years. So this was a 500 MVA cable that we were looking at, HVDC cable, but now it has gone to 2 MVA level. So I don't think even that is enough. But in the context of looking at green hydrogen developments, I think the cabling and these things are becoming kind of history. Unnecessary. But green hydrogen is still, yet to become a reality. But the future is green hydrogen. So grey hydrogen is already made, and we are looking at green hydrogen economy. And India is big time looking into green hydrogen developments, even inside Sri Lanka. So my sincere request to India is to look at multilateral free trading of energy and allow the grid. Because if you look at the grid around the South Asian zones, the biggest grid is Indian grid. So all the other countries are interconnected to the Indian grid, we are not. But with the HVDC cable coming in, probably we will also be connected to India through the Indian grid to the other countries. So if I have the privilege to buy energy from Bhutan at a lower price by paying India some kind of a transition cost, it should be allowed. And the Indian business model should be to transmit energy, not to trade energy by buying it from Mr. Zangpo's country and selling it to Bangladesh, but to facilitate Bangladesh to buy energy from Bhutan by using their network by paying a fee. That's my sincere request. If we want to walk the talk, as Mr. Modi, the Prime Minister, has said in the COP26 in Scotland, if they want to actually walk the talk, that's the way forward. If not, these things are going to be just numbers and just things what we have said in documents. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I commit on behalf of CPPR that this point is well taken to be part of the documentation. I think what you meant is something like a beating charge, correct? You use a different terminology, but that is what exactly it is, the beating charge for transmission, right? Correct. Okay, this point is well taken.
Thank you very much.
This is part of the documentation. Audience for having this session too friendly and engaging. And I think collectively we together concluded that there are three building blocks towards the whole thing. Energy, energy, and energy. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of the conference.
Mr. Narasimhan Sandhanam and Mr. Nidrup Sangpo for the integrating discussion and paving the way for future conversations surrounding energy. So now I request Vice Admiral MP Muralidharan sir to hand over the mementos to our esteemed panel. He is a former Director General of the Indian Coast Guard. He is also a distinguished fellow with CPPR. He guides us and mentors us in areas of defense and maritime studies. So I welcome you, sir, to kindly give away the mementos.
Thank you.
Ms. Gauri Singh. Mr. Admiral Jayannath Kalumbari. Mr. Nidrup Sangpo. And our moderator for the session, Dr. Madhu Pillai. Can we have Thank you all. So we will now break.